Let's call this an experiment. Part of the whole mission statement of the Game OverThinker, other than, getting attention from me, obviously, is exploring the places where the relatively closed-off world of gaming culture intersects with the rest of the culture. To that end, from time to time, I'm going to try and explore the broader pop-cultural histories that inform the background of some of gaming's biggest characters and franchises. Hence, Who's Your Daddy? Now, obviously, this will mostly end up applying to more long-running institutions because, well, there's more material to work with. Mainly, though, it must be said that more recent big games don't tend to have nearly as much to delve into in that regard. For example, you want to know where Halo comes from? Go read a book called Ringworld by Larry Niven. Boom. Done. There you go. Now you know where Halo comes from. What's Uncharted made of? Well, do you know who Indiana Jones is? Do you know who Dane Cook is? All done. So then, without further delay, let's look into some of the many, many elements that may have directly or indirectly influenced one of the all-time most enduring game heroes, Mega Man. Now, being that you're watching this at ScrewAttack, I'm going to assume that the official specifics are already well known, i.e. that Mega Man the character and the basic look and setup of his world were created by graphic designer Keiji Inafune and a small development team at Capcom in 1987. Honestly, part of what makes Mega Man such an ideal candidate to kick off this sub-series is that it's notoriously difficult, if not outright impossible, to get Japanese game designers to take individual credit for anything. Even Inafune insists that most of the idea for Mega Man had already been thought up by his supervisor before he came on board, and thus only accepts credit for about half of it. As such, there's not a tremendous amount of information as to what specifically suggested the game's characters and ideas. But the bigger picture is a much different story. First and foremost, Mega Man is a robot, so we can start there. While the idea of autonomous mechanical creatures is about as old as time, the word robot is actually only 90 years old. It was first used in 1920 in a Czech science fiction play called Rossum's Universal Robots by writer Karel Čapek, about a factory where mechanical humanoid workers may or may not be being abused. Čapek credited his brother Josef for coming up with the actual word, based on an old Slavic term referring to hard work or slavery. It didn't take long for robots to become a staple of the science fiction genre, but they wouldn't really hit their true potential until they became the favorite topic of legendary author Isaac Asimov, whose work was so comprehensive and compelling that it's commonly cited as both inspiring and directing the course of research in the actual field of robotics. Though that's not too surprising, since the word robotics didn't even exist until Asimov made it up. Now, Asimov is generally considered to be one of the most important and influential science fiction authors of all time, so we can't go deeply in depth regarding his work in this context, especially since there's so much of it. Basically, if you come across a book with his name on it, read it. But of immediate interest to our little exercise here are his contributions to the science fiction of robots. Most importantly, Asimov is the father of the positronic brain, the notion of manufactured artificially intelligent learning and operation systems, and a governing principle shorthanded as Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. Asimov's robot stories are so pervasive that it's fair to say that every story about robots and robotics since has in one way or another been a reaction to where he took the concept. However, Asimov's robots were mainly vehicles for speculation about emerging technology and philosophical questions about free will, neither of which are much a part of the more broadly drawn Mega Man mythology. Though ostensibly robots, the characters in the series have more in common with the clockwork men or artificial people that have filled human fantasy since long before robot was even a word. It'd be impossible to cover all of them, but for the most famous ones, you've probably already heard of them. For example, you know who wanted to build him some mechanical buddies? Leonardo da Vinci. In 1950, a series of long-lost sketchbooks belonging to the great Renaissance artist and thinker were rediscovered, and included among the drawings dated 1495 were the blueprints to build, I shit you not, a robot knight. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Light, version 1.0. Now, I know what you're thinking. Since we have the plans, has anyone tried to build it? Well, yes, they did, and apparently it pretty much works. A fellow named Mario Today actually just wrote a whole book on the subject, and yes, that's a robot lion on the cover. European Jewish folklore famously tells the story of the Golem, an artificial man made of clay and brought to life by a rabbi to protect his people from pogroms and other anti-Semitic violence. Depending on who you ask, Golem legends are themselves based on ancient accounts of clay people going all the way back to the Old Testament. And hey, we all remember this guy, don't we? In Frank L. Baum's original Oz books, the Tin Man started out as a human woodsman who had a spell cast on his axe that made him chop off his own body parts, which he then had to replace with mechanical ones. That's pretty badass. The Oz books also have a genuine robot named TikTok running around as well. However, unquestionably the most famous mechanical man of fiction is the eponymous little wooden boy Pinocchio. The story of a wooden puppet who comes to life was first created by Carlo Collodi in 1883 and has since been transformed into almost every language and art form known to man. And even though he's not technically a robot, the theme of a mechanical child has made both the story, both the background, and even the inspiration of some of robot fiction's most inspired tales. In fact, you know where the Pinocchio character has always been particularly popular? Japan. Yeah, a perpetually childlike creation of technology is big in Japan? You're shocked, I can tell. You could probably do a whole hour just cataloging Japanese robot sci-fi that makes heavy reference to Pinocchio, but for brevity's sake, we'll zero in on the work of a fellow whose influence on Japanese culture, and thus indirectly a big part of gaming culture, is so great that he's often unironically called the father of anime and the god of comics. Osamu Tezuka. Born in 1928, Tezuka is unquestionably the most influential Japanese comic and animation figure of all time. What are now considered the mandatory hallmarks of Japanese cartooning, specifically the big eyes look, exists because he started it. Tezuka was particularly fascinated by stories of science fiction and robots. He based his landmark manga Metropolis on Fritz Lang's seminal sci-fi classic of the same name, despite having only seen it as a poster depicting its most famous creature, the robot Maria. But his most famous and enduring creation would be a science fiction upgrade of Pinocchio called Astro Boy. In Astro Boy, a scientist who loses his son in a violent accident creates a mechanical replacement, only to reject him when the robot boy just isn't human enough. After a series of adventures, Astro Boy finds his place as a hero, defending his future world from crime, aliens, and even other evil robots. Astro Boy's popularity and influence in Japan is almost beyond measure. Nearly every action-adventure manga to come after it owes at least something to Tezuka's flying boy hero, to say nothing of both live-action and anime series. Some of you may be familiar with Artificial Humanoid Kakaida, a 1972 tokusatsu series by Shotaro Ishinomori, a protege of Tezuka who also created the better-known Kamen Rider series. Kakaida is a heroic robot created by a scientist to defend his family from an organization of evil androids. On similar lines, in 1973, Tatsunoko released the anime series Casshern, in which the son of a brilliant scientist transforms himself into a robot hero to battle rogue robots who've declared war on humanity. In the West, Casshern is probably best known for appearing as a playable character in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, or for a batshit insane live-action movie made in 2004. Incidentally, Casshern's sidekick is Friender, a robot dog that can transform into vehicles to help him fight. Remind you of anybody? Hell, even Stanley Kubrick was an Astro Boy fan. He wanted Tezuka to design the technology for his film 2001, though scheduling conflicts ultimately made that impossible. And while he never specifically cited it as such, it's easy to see a heavy Astro Boy influence in AI, a sci-fi reworking of, Pinocchio, about a lost child that Kubrick had planned right up until his death, and was later completed by his friend Steven Spielberg. And, to bring it all full circle, Astro Boy is cited by Keiji Inafune himself as a major inspiration for, well, obviously, Mega Man. So the next time you sit down to blaze through some robot masters, take a moment and reflect on just how rich the lineage of the humble blue bomber really is. The master of the Renaissance thought, ancient folklore, Italian fairy tales, a dean of science fiction, and the godfather of anime himself. Clearly, Mega Man is made of more than just pixels. And that's not bad for a guy whose name is a pun.